This is John Rooney, and this is Luis Vazquez, two players that most people probably aren't familiar with, playing in an uneventful game in late August of 2025. And yet, unbeknownst to them, and basically everyone else, they're about to accomplish something so rare that it's only happened 5 times before, and so distinct that it stands isolated from the rest of MLB history. But to understand what makes this moment so significant, we first need to understand this. This is a graph of every home run hit in the history of the MLB. Each dot represents a player, and 2 players are connected by a line if they share a home run. For example, in 1951, Bobby Thomson hit the iconic shot heard round the world off of Ralph Branca, so they have a line connecting them. In total, there have been over 15,000 players that have been involved in a collective 334,000 home runs. But this graph shows more than just home runs. It shows the history of Major League Baseball. You see, currently each player is colored based on the year they debuted in the MLB. For the purposes of this video, we'll consider the start of the MLB as 1901, since that's when the American League was formed. It's considered the start of the modern era, and there's just not a lot of data from before then. By coloring the dots this way, we can start to see the structure of this graph. The graphing algorithm will naturally place players that share home runs with each other closer together, which explains the gradual progression around the graph. It's also why the middle of the graph is not connected, since players obviously can't hit home runs against other players from different eras. That being said, it is possible to connect players of different eras together through a series of home runs. For example, here are 2 MVP, World Series winning, two-way players that are widely considered the greatest players of their respective eras, if not the greatest players of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Babe Ruth and Shohei Ohtani. They're separated by over 80 years, and yet they can be connected by a series of just 7 home runs. The arrows here point in the direction of who hit the home run. For example, in 1934, Babe Ruth hit a home run off of Eldon Ocker. In 1940, Ocker allowed a home run to Bob Feller, who then himself allowed a home run to Al Kaline in 1956, so on and so forth until you get to Ohtani. Now the interesting thing about the graph as you see it here is that it's connected, which means that you can connect any 2 players on the graph through a series of home runs, which made me wonder, how many home runs would it take to connect the very first home run in MLB history to the most recent home run? At the time of recording this video, the most recent home run hit in the MLB is Will Smith's World Series winning home run off of Shane Bieber, and the first home run in this graph occurred in 1901 between Tom McCreary and Happy Townsend. Well, it turns out you can connect these 2 moments with a series of just 9 home runs. 125 years of baseball history covered with just 9 swings. If you're familiar with baseball history, then you probably recognize some of these names. 3 of these players are in the Hall of Fame, with 1 being a future Hall of Famer. And that's not a coincidence. These players will have had very long careers and will have been involved in a large number of home runs, 2 important characteristics when connecting players of different eras. By now I'm sure you've noticed that each player in the graph has a different sized dot. The size of each dot corresponds to the total number of home runs a player has been involved in. By visualizing the graph in this way, we can see how the game of baseball has evolved. Over time, it's become more normal to see players hit more home runs throughout their careers. It also helps us visualize which players really stand out among the rest, like how much of an outlier Babe Ruth really was in his era. He put up numbers that no one else had even been remotely close to, and wouldn't be touched for over 50 years until the legendary Hank Aaron. It's important to remember that this graph also includes pitchers, and the pitcher who has allowed the most home runs is Jamie Moyer with 525, who pitched until he was 49 years old. You probably know that the largest dot on this graph belongs to Barry Bonds, who hit 771 home runs in his career. It's worth noting at this point that I am including postseason home runs in this graph. You may think that since he has the most home runs, Barry Bonds would be the most important player in the graph, but that's not necessarily true. In his career, Barry Bonds hit 771 home runs, but that came off of 454 different players, which means that he has 454 connections in the graph. Using this number to determine the importance of a player is known as degree centrality, and it turns out there is one player who has more links than Barry Bonds. That player is Albert Pujols. He's hit home runs off of 463 different pitchers, as well as allowed 2 home runs during his first and only pitching appearance in a blowout game in 2022, giving him the most connections of any player in this graph. So Albert Pujols could be considered the most important player in the graph, but what is the single most important home run? Well, for that, we can use a different metric known as edge betweenness centrality. In the context of our graph, this would be the home run that is used the most when connecting different players together, like how we did earlier. And in that sense, it could be considered the most important home run in the graph. The year is 1951, and 42-year-old Emil Dutch Leonard is pitching for the Cubs in the 18th season of his career. He's nearing the end of what was a very solid career as a knuckleball pitcher. But before that can happen, he'll have to face a 20-year-old rookie in the 10th inning of a tied ball game. He couldn't have known it at the time, but Leonard was about to pitch to one of the greatest baseball players of all time. A player who would go on to hit 661 home runs, win Rookie of the Year, become a 24-time All-Star, 12-time Gold Glover, 2-time MVP, World Series champion, Hall of Famer. But at the time, Willie Mays was just starting his career. He had only hit 4 home runs. This was just his 29th game ever in the MLB. Mays would go on to do many incredible things in his illustrious 23-year career. But in the sole context of this video, this game-winning 3-run home run was the most important. And it makes sense why this home run is so important for this graph. Leonard and Mays both had long careers spanning a combined 40 years, and this home run acts as a crucial bridge to connect different eras of baseball together. One of my favorite things about creating a graph like this is that it gives me access to a wealth of completely useless information. For example, the biggest difference in height between a pitcher and batter for a home run occurred when 5'6" Jose Altuve hit a home run off of 6'10" Chris Young, a difference of 16 inches. The biggest difference in weight occurred in 1938 when 295-pound Walter Brown allowed a home run to 150-pound Lloyd Wainer. Fittingly, and I'm not making this up, Walter and Lloyd were commonly known as Jumbo and Little Poison respectively. In the history of the MLB, there have been 30 pairs of players who have hit home runs off each other. 12 of these times it happened in the same game, and 4 of them were even in the same inning. The most recent was when Cole Hamels and Matt Cain traded home runs in the 3rd inning of a game in 2012. In terms of home runs, they were a perfectly even rivalry. But what about rivalries that were more one-sided? Well, the most times a player has hit a home run off another player is 19, and it belongs to Hall of Famer Duke Snider, who dominated fellow Hall of Famer Robin Roberts, hitting 19 home runs off of him over 14 years with a batting average just under 300 and an OPS above 900. Something I like to do with graphs like this is to come up with random scenarios and see if they've ever happened before. For example, have 2 brothers ever shared a home run? It turns out that's happened 5 times in history, most recently in 2021 when Bradley Zimmer hit a home run off of his brother Kyle Zimmer. That's kinda funny, but something infinitely funnier to me would be brother-in-laws sharing a home run. And it turns out that this has happened twice, most recently when Brandon Crawford hit a home run off of Garrett Cole, who also happens to be his sister's husband.
She did a half clap, I think, maybe, like, yeah, no,
Talk about an awkward family reunion. Another random thing I wanted to look up was if 2 players with the same name have ever shared a home run. Surprisingly, to me at least, this has only happened once, when Will Smith hit a home run off of Will Smith in 2020. Personally though, for this upcoming season, I'm hoping for some crazy situation that would allow Max Muncy to hit a home run off of Max Muncy, not least because they somehow also share the same birthday. Speaking of shared birthdays, imagine a scenario where a pitcher and a batter have the same birthday and they are playing against each other on their shared birthday, and in that game, the batter hits a home run against that pitcher. Okay, that one actually hasn't happened once before. It's happened 3 times. Most recently, when Raul Ibanez, born June 2nd, hit a home run off of Josh Gere, also born June 2nd, on June 2nd, 2009. To be fair though, we are talking about 125 years of history. Over the course of 217,000 games, weird things are bound to happen. And to really appreciate everything that's happened in that time, and to understand this graph, we need to go back to the beginning. In 1901, there were 16 total teams and 455 home runs were hit all year. For the purposes of this visualization, players who played the majority of their games in the American League will be highlighted in red, and players who played in the National League will be in blue. It's hard to tell because of all the overlapping edges, but if you were to look at the 1901 year as its own graph, you'd see how separate the American League and National League were. This makes sense. American League teams never played against National League teams. The World Series wasn't even a thing yet, and it was less common for players to move between leagues. The only thing that keeps the 1901 network connected is Snake Wiltse. In 1901, he played 7 games for the Pittsburgh Pirates in the National League, giving up 2 home runs, before being released and subsequently signed by the Philadelphia Athletics of the American League, where he played 19 games, giving up 1 home run. He was the only player in the entire year to be involved in home runs in both the American League and National League. We can fast forward a few years, and by 1910, the split between the American League and National League becomes obvious in the main graph. There are of course a few outliers, like Irish McIlveen, who played 5 games in the National League, giving up 1 home run as a pitcher, and then went on to play 172 games in the American League, never being involved in a home run again. For the most part though, this visual split is pretty consistent, and it remains that way when something interesting happens in 1914. You see, in 1914, a third league was introduced to Major League Baseball called the Federal League. 59 players from the American League and National League would join it, instantly connecting it to the rest of the graph. Its existence was short-lived though, only lasting 2 seasons before being disbanded. Interestingly, one of the most famous ballparks in baseball history, Wrigley Field, only exists today because it was originally built for a Federal League team, the Chicago Whales. Like Wrigley Field, the green dots on this graph represent the small but not forgotten impact of the Federal League. Up until this point, we've been in the dead ball era, named such because games were generally very low scoring and home runs were quite rare. However, in 1920, a number of rule changes were made that would result in players getting more hits. And as we move forward through the years, you'll see how some players' dots get bigger over time as home runs become more common, especially Babe Ruth. In 1935, we reach a new major development on our graph. You've probably been wondering for a while now what this cluster of dots was. These are the Negro Leagues. In 2024, the MLB officially incorporated Negro League stats from 1920 to 1948 in its historical record. The data I have only has box scores from 1935 onward, and even then the data is considered incomplete, but I thought it was better to include it in this state than not at all. As you probably know, African Americans were excluded from playing Major League Baseball, and as a result, many black baseball teams were created, and from 1920 to 1948, there were 7 major Negro Leagues. The player with the most home runs in the Negro Leagues is Josh Gibson. My data has him with 76 home runs, but like I mentioned, it's incomplete. His official home run count from the MLB is 176. Some estimates have him hitting over 250 home runs in competitive games, and his official Hall of Fame plaque says he hit almost 800. While it may be impossible to fully understand his greatness, the ability and impact of Josh Gibson cannot be overstated. He holds the official all-time MLB records for career batting average and career OPS. Tragically, Gibson would pass away just 3 months before the integration of Major League Baseball. Even though it's hard to tell because of all the overlapping lines, there is still no link from the Negro Leagues to the rest of the MLB. Of course, all that would change with one man. Jackie Robinson only played one season in the Negro Leagues, hitting just a handful of home runs. He would go on to join the Montreal Royals, a minor league team for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and on April 15, 1947, he would make his debut for the Dodgers, officially breaking baseball's color barrier. Just 3 days after his debut, on April 18th, Jackie Robinson would hit his first home run in the MLB, forever connecting the Negro Leagues to the rest of Major League Baseball. This was just the beginning though. By the end of 1947, 3 black players had been involved in home runs in the Negro Leagues and the MLB. The connections between the Negro Leagues and the MLB would grow slowly but steadily through the years as they became more intertwined. However, it wouldn't be until 1959 that the MLB could be considered fully integrated. That's when Pumpsie Green became the first black player to play for the Boston Red Sox, over 12 years after Jackie Robinson made his debut. The integration era of baseball brought many all-time greats to the major leagues. Players like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and Frank Robinson, just to name a few, who are all currently in the top 10 for most career home runs. The MLB had just gone through a massive transformation, and it was about to go through another one. In 1959, a new third league called the Continental League was formally announced. Feeling threatened, the MLB decided to negotiate with the Continental League, and as a result, the MLB voted to expand to 4 new cities. By 1960, the Continental League had disbanded, and in 1961, the MLB expanded for the first time in its history, adding 2 new teams to the American League, the Los Angeles Angels and the Washington Senators. In 1962, the National League would follow, adding the Houston Colt 45s and the New York Mets. Currently highlighted is every home run hit by a player from an expansion team. In 1969, the MLB would add 4 new teams. As you might expect, as the league expanded, more teams meant more games, which meant more home runs. There was an increase of 1,000 home runs between the 1960 season and the 1969 season. In 1977, the American League added 2 new teams while the National League did not. This imbalance lasted 16 years and can be seen on the graph, as the American League hit more home runs than the National League during this duration. This would balance out when the National League added 2 new teams in 1993, and in 1998 the MLB would expand again, adding the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. This currently marks the end of MLB's expansion, over which time the league grew from 16 teams to 30 teams. And even though the number of teams would stop growing, the home runs would not. You see, we've covered nearly 100 years of baseball history, and in that time, there have been just 15 players to have hit 500 or more career home runs. But then, over the course of the next decade, something would happen. Ten new players would join the illustrious 500 home run club. Naturally, with the expansion bringing more players into the league, it makes sense you'd see an increase in the number of power hitters. But still, this increase was drastic. Perhaps something more unnatural was at play. A conspiracy arose that the baseballs were juiced, being manufactured differently to travel further. I found this article from 2000 from Sports Illustrated trying to answer why home runs had increased, saying that the baseballs weren't juiced, instead it was due to smaller ballparks, a changing game, and better lighting. And they'd be partially right. The baseballs weren't juiced, the players were. Welcome to the steroid era of baseball. Out of the 10 players that reached 500 home runs in that time, 7 of them would end up having ties to performance-enhancing drugs, as well as a number of other notable players. This makes what Frank Thomas, Jim Thome, and Ken Griffey Jr. did even more impressive, still managing to reach 500 home runs while also going up against steroid-era pitchers. Unsurprisingly, the number of home runs hit per year went down as the MLB became stricter on steroid use. That is, until recently. 2019 marked the peak for the most home runs ever hit in an MLB season at 6,700. Okay, that year it might have actually been juiced balls. But still, home runs are up, and it's undeniable that the game is evolving. It's been evolving for the last 125 years. And as for what's to come next, it's anyone's best guess. These are all the players that played in the most recent MLB season. They are the ones shaping the current era of baseball, and the ones responsible for determining what this graph will look like in the future. So hopefully now you know what I mean when I say that the history of baseball is embedded in this graph. And now that you understand the graph, let's test your knowledge. What do you think the highlighted links represent here? You can pause if you want a second to think about it. These links represent every home run hit between a team from the American League and a team from the National League. How about another one? What do you think this graph represents? Highlighted here is every player who has hit a home run while playing the position of pitcher, and the highlighted links are all the home runs they hit while they were pitching in a game. If you know what to look for, you can visualize just about anything. Here's one final graph. See if you can guess what the highlighted players represent, and bonus points if you can guess what the colors mean. I'll let the comments try to figure this one out, so leave a guess if you have one. So there you go. We've talked about the structure of this graph, some random statistics, and even briefly covered the history of the MLB. But there is still one more thing I want to talk about. You see, earlier in this video, I told you that this graph as you see it here is connected. But what I was hiding was that there's actually 6 pairs of players that are floating in space, completely disconnected from the rest of the graph. You can try to think about what it would mean for 2 players to be disconnected from the rest of the graph. It would take a pitcher who has only ever given up 1 career home run to a batter who has only ever hit 1 career home run. I like to call this a 1-to-1 home run, or maybe a soulmate home run. I'm actually not sure what to call it. But what I do know is that it's happened just 6 times in MLB history. This typically happens when a weak contact hitter eventually gets lucky and hits his one and only home run against a pitcher who has only ever played a handful of games in the MLB. And that brings us back to August 24th, 2025, the most recent time this happened, when Luis Vazquez faced John Rooney. Now, up until this moment, Luis Vazquez has played 31 Major League games, collecting just 5 hits in that time. And on the other side is John Rooney, who is making his MLB debut in what would be his first and only Major League game at the time of recording this. Admittedly, both of these players are still playing in the minor leagues, and depending on when you watch this video, one of these players may have been involved in another home run. But, at least for now, we get to appreciate a moment in history that stands alone, isolated from every other home run that's ever come before it. Thank you to my sponsors on GitHub who support the channel and allow me to make videos like this one, which took a lot of time and effort. By sponsoring me on GitHub, you get access to the code from all my videos, including this one. Link in the description if you're interested. If you made it this far and enjoyed the video, then consider subscribing and leaving a like, it really does help. Thanks for watching.